We should know this by heart. Let's read together. Great are the works of the Lord. They are pondered by all who delight in them. And our series big thing, ready? We are to ponder God's great works so our faith in God will grow bigger and our love for God will grow better. So today we pack up our things, we jump in our time machine, and we go back 2,600 years to the nation of Babylon. So you need to find in your Bibles Daniel chapter 3, page 627 if you're using our Brown Pew Bible. Now this land is rich in history, good and bad. And it's gone by many names over the years. Sumer, S-U-M-E-R, Assyria, Babylon, as is the case today, followed by the Medo-Persian Empire, and today we call it Iraq. So that gives you an idea where this story takes place. Now, throughout the hundreds and hundreds of years, different leaders have ruled there. They had different gods and strange customs. But some of the names sound almost like they come out of science fiction books, as if they belong in Star Trek. Well, actually, the very first name here I'm going to show you was used in one of the episodes of the original series Star Trek. Sargon. Sargon. That sounds nasty, doesn't it? Then you got Sennacherib and Darius and Cyrus and Xerxes and Nebuchadnezzar, and he's the king in today's story. Darius is the king in next week's story. As we ponder God's great works, so our faith in God will grow bigger and our love for God will grow better. So here's the situation. We're going to set the scene, set the table, so to speak. In 605 BC, Nebuchadnezzar began a series of deportations. After he conquered Israel, he was moving many of the residents from Israel to Babylon. They were to serve as servants and slaves there. And in 586 BC, he completed the destruction of Israel and Jerusalem by also destroying the famous temple, Solomon's temple. So, everything was pretty much over for God's people, or so they thought. But God has a way of bringing the dead back to life. But right now, they're in a tough spot. Many of them are in a pagan land with pagan gods and pagan customs. And one of them was Daniel. Daniel was one of the young men who was taken captive to Babylon. Excuse me. But our story today focuses not on Daniel, but on three other young men. Something happened and my finger must have really been quick on the trigger there. There we go. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. You know those guys. A story that we've known since we were little children. Three men thrown into a fiery furnace. Now, by God's providence, these three guys were elevated to a fairly high position in the pagan government of Babylon. God has a way of doing things like that. I mean, they believed in the one true God. They were not going to compromise. They were not going to give up their faith. They did the best of what they were called to do. So they made sure they were the best of servants to make the best of the situation. And God elevated them to fairly high positions. Now, let's talk about Nebuchadnezzar for a few moments. This guy has a problem with pride. I mean, you talk about a big head. His head was so big, his ears were so very far apart. That's how big his head was. Fat head. He's full of pride. Proud, arrogant man. And when you're that full of pride, you tend to do stupid things and say stupid things. And we're going to see his stupidity in today's story. So here we go, chapter 3, verses 1 and following. King Nebuchadnezzar made an image of gold, 90 feet high and 9 feet wide. That was a pretty stupid thing to do right there. He set it up on the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. Now, we think this is probably a statue of the chief god of the Babylonians called Nebu. In fact, Nebuchadnezzar's name is sort of a salute to that pagan god. So you've got this 90-foot high image of gold of Nebu, the bigwig of the gods of Babylon. So then what does he do? He calls a meeting of a bunch of government officials. Verse 2. He then summoned the satraps and prefects. They're something like governors. Governors, advisors, treasurers, judges, magistrates, and all the other provincial officials to come to the dedication of the image he had set up. So this is a big deal. This is big government at its worst. You got big government officials, you got this big government image of gold, and you've got the big government king himself, and he's wanting everyone to worship it. So what happens? Well, verse 3. So the satraps, prefects, governors, advisors, treasurers, judges, and magistrates, and all the other provincial officers or officials assembled for the dedication of the image that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. And they stood before it. Maybe standing out of honor, out of respect. So they're standing before this monstrous image of gold. A bunch of politicians, all dressed in their best, no doubt. I would imagine some of them didn't want to be there. Some of them do. They're true believers. Others, they just want to please the king. So here they are. And I'm sure there's some chatter going on, crowd noise. But then when the herald takes his place, there's a hush. There's silence as the herald says what he says, verse 4. Then the herald loudly proclaimed, "This is what you are commanded to do, O peoples, nations, and men of every language. As soon as you hear the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, pipes, and all kinds of music, you must fall down and worship the image of gold that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up." So there's a big band there, a lot of musicians. When they strike the chord, they're supposed to fall down and worship. They better, because verse 6, whoever does not fall down and worship will immediately be thrown into a blazing fire. That's some incentive right there. Oh, yeah, I believe in big government, big religion, big state church. Oh, yeah. Here they are, dressed in their best, ready to do as the king tells them to do, for fear of being thrown into a fiery furnace. Well, I guess that's one way to get people to worship your God. There's no doubt there's tension in the air, drama, anticipation. So what happens? Verse 7. The band begins to play, right? Therefore, as soon as they heard the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, and all kinds of music, All the peoples, nations, and men of every language fell down and worshiped the image of gold that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. So that's the call to worship, the band starting to play. And they drop to the ground and they worship. This is now their religion, the state religion. This is what they need to get used to. This big 90-foot statue of gold. Okay, so we're not told how much time passes between verses 8 and 9. A little time, I would assume. Described as at this time in verse 8. At this time, some astrologers came forward and denounced the Jews. Some things never change. These astrologers, these people who interpreted the stars to try to come up with what the gods wanted them to do. They denounced the Jews. It's been going on for thousands of years, even in our own country. In the halls of Congress, people are denouncing the Jews. At this time, some astrologers came forward and denounced the Jews. They said to King Nebuchadnezzar, "O king, live forever." Long live the king is another way of saying that. Long live the king. And now they remind him of something of which he needs no reminding. You have issued a decree, O king, that everyone who hears the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, pipes, and all kinds of music must fall down and worship the image of gold, and that whoever does not fall down and worship will be thrown into a blazing furnace. And I can see King Nebuchadnezzar going like, "Yep, that's what it said, all right. What's your point? I'm the one who made that law. I know what it says." Well, here's the point, verse 12. But there are some Jews whom you have set over the affairs of the province of Babylon. Oh, I wonder if envy may be playing a part in this. Jews, positions of power in the Babylonian government, and now they find a way to get rid of them, you see. There are some Jews whom you have set over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who pay no attention to you, O king. They neither serve your gods nor worship the image of gold you have set up. They make their case, they level their accusations, and this is how the king responds. Verse 13, furious with rage, the text says. Furious with rage. So stupidity can cause you to say and do dumb things, stupid things. And so can fury and rage. Furious with rage, Nebuchadnezzar summoned Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So these men were brought before the king. And Nebuchadnezzar said to them, "Is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods or worship the image of gold I have set up?" He interrogates them. He's giving them one more chance to renounce their faith in their God and worship his God, He's giving them one more chance to evade a torturous, terrible death. He says, now, when you hear the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, pipes, all kinds of music. When you hear the band play, if you are ready to fall down and worship the image I made, very good. But if you do not worship it, you will be thrown immediately into a blazing furnace. And here's a real stupid thing he says. Then what God will be able to rescue you from my hand? Oh, how proud he is, full of pride and arrogance, hubris. Then what God will be able to rescue you from my hand? He's challenging the one true God. A few weeks ago, we looked at Smackdown in the Valley, and then we looked at Showdown on the Mountain. Well, here's going to be another one right here. God takes these challenges seriously. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied to the king, "O Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you in this matter. If we are thrown into the blazing fire, the God we serve is able to save us from it. And he will rescue us from your hand, O king. But even if he does not, we want you to know, O king, that we will not serve your gods or worship the image of gold you have set up." So right there is their confession of faith. They stand before the king, no shame, no apology, simply stating what they believe. But there's something interesting in their confession. Perhaps you caught it. But even if he does not, we'll come back to that. Okay, so now how does Nebuchadnezzar respond again? Now, he's furious again. He was, let's say on a scale of 1 to 10, he was at an 8 with fury and rage. Well, now he's at a 10. Then Nebuchadnezzar was furious with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and his attitude toward them changed. He seemed to have had for a while a soft spot for them. Not any longer. He ordered the furnace heated 7 times hotter than usual, which probably is an expression meaning make it as hot as you can, hot as possible. And commanded some of the strongest soldiers in his army to tie up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and throw them into the blazing furnace. So these men, wearing their robes, trousers, turbans, and other clothes, were bound and thrown into the blazing furnace. The king's command was so urgent, and the furnace was so hot, that the flames of the fire killed the soldiers who took up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And these 3 men, firmly tied, fell into the blazing fire. Well, that's what the king said would happen. He has kept his word. The deed has been done. Now, we're also not told how much time goes by between verse 23 and verse 24. I would say at least several minutes. They're all gathering around, they're watching, not getting too close to the fire, of course. They saw what happened to the soldiers. But they're watching. Perhaps they're waiting to hear screams of agony, screams of pain. Then King Nebuchadnezzar leaped to his feet in amazement and asked his advisors, weren't there 3 men that were tied up and threw into the fire? They replied, certainly, O king. He said, look, I see 4 men walking around in the fire, unbound and unharmed. And the 4th looks like a son of the gods. You have to remember Nebuchadnezzar is a devout pagan polytheist, a believer in many gods. This 4th being that he sees, he understands it to be some kind of heavenly being, some kind of a being not of this world. Some believe that this is a pre-incarnate appearance of Jesus. I don't think the text justifies that interpretation. It may come from the King James Version where it says Nebuchadnezzar sees someone like a, quote, son of God. But the more appropriate translation, like a son of the gods. Somebody else is in there who shouldn't be in there. That's the point. Some kind of spiritual being. Later, Nebuchadnezzar calls him an angel. Nebuchadnezzar then approached the opening of the blazing furnace and shouted, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God. Come out. Come here. So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego come out of the fire. And the satraps, prefects, governors, and royal advisors crowded around them. They saw that the fire had not harmed their bodies, nor was a hair of their heads singed. Their robes were not scorched, and there was no smell of fire on them. Then Nebuchadnezzar said, Praise be to the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel and rescued his servants. They trusted in him and defied the king's command and were willing to give up their lives rather than serve or worship any god except their own. Therefore I decree, this is the king still speaking, I decree that the people of any nation or language who say anything against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego be cut into pieces and their houses be burned into piles of rubble. For no other God can save in this way. He loves gruesome, terrible punishments, doesn't he? Remember what he said earlier? Then what God will be able to save you from my hand? And now he has to confess the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego can, and did. And if anybody says anything bad about that God, I'm going to cut you to pieces. I'm going to cause your houses to be turned into piles of rubble. I'm sure that was not pleasing to God. Okay, so what happens now? Verse 30. Then the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the province of Babylon. So they were servants, and now they're even higher servants because of this. What a story to ponder. What a great work to consider. So what are some of the faith truths that we can ponder and hopefully cause our faith to grow bigger and our love to grow better? Biblical faith does not compromise truth in the face of threats. These young men, uprooted from their homes and taken hundreds of miles away into a foreign land, apparently decided, like Joseph in the Old Testament, apparently decided that they would do their best where they were, make the best of the situation. They were good servants. They were good citizens of the country of Babylon. And the officials noticed, and they got promoted through God's divine providence. But they drew the line when it came to what the state required them to do about their worship. As if to say, we don't like it here, we'd rather be back home, but our home back there is total destruction and total destruction. We're here in Babylon. We're going to make the best of our situation and be the best of servants, the best of citizens. We won't lead a rebellion against the state, but we will not bow the knee to the state god. They drew the line there. Biblical faith does not compromise truth in the face of threats. We see a similar situation in the 5th chapter of the book of Acts. You may recall this story. The apostles are preaching in the name of Jesus, and they're healing a whole lot of people. The Jewish high priest and his cohorts decide we have to do something about this. And so they arrest them and they command them, don't you preach in the name of Jesus anymore. And they put them in jail. And that night, God sends an angel, and there's a jailbreak. Angels are real good about breaking people out of jail. And so there's a jailbreak here, so to speak. And the apostles go, and they go back, and they start preaching and teaching Jesus again. And they're commanded not to again. And they gave this command, or this response, which you know well. We must obey God rather than man. So they were being told by the religious leaders, don't you preach Jesus anymore. And they say, no, we're not going to obey you. We must obey God. Well, this makes them even madder. And so they're arrested again. And this time, they're dead set on killing them. But a cooler head prevails, a man named Gamaliel, a respected Pharisee. And he says to the rest of the Sanhedrin, be careful what you do with these men. If what they are saying and doing is from God, you won't be able to stop it. But if it's not from God, it'll go away. It'll die down. So the high priest and the other leaders decide, well, okay, that makes a little bit of sense to us. We're not going to kill them. We'll just beat them half to death. And so they flog them, and then they release them. And guess what the apostles do? They rejoice that they were counted worthy to suffer for the name of Christ. And they go right back out in the streets of Jerusalem and preach Jesus again. Biblical faith does not compromise truth in the face of threats. And what we see in the story of these three Hebrews is sort of an Old Testament illustration of what we talked about from the book of Acts. Okay, what else? Biblical faith has confidence in God, not in an outcome. They confessed to King Nebuchadnezzar, we will not serve your God, we will not bow. We know the threat. You're going to throw us into the fire. The God we serve is able to deliver us, they say. But even if he does not, we won't worship your God. So the outcome probably, they thought, would be, we're either going to perish in the fire or God will deliver us from the fire. We're not sure what His will is going to be. He's able to deliver us, but even if He doesn't, we won't worship your God. You see, they have faith in the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. They have faith in the God who determines the outcomes. So biblical faith has confidence in God, not in a certain outcome. Sometimes in the Bible we see God delivering His people through death. Sometimes painful death, gory death. Stephen was stoned. Paul beheaded. Peter crucified. Was God able to deliver each of them? Of course He was. In His infinite will, He chose not to. And countless other Christians down through the ages endured terrible times of suffering and death. Biblical faith has confidence in God, not in an outcome. Is it biblical to pray for a certain outcome? I would say yes, it is. But your faith is in the God who determines the outcome, not in the outcome itself. Jesus is a perfect example of that. In the garden, He prayed, did He not? Father, if it's possible, take this cup from me. He's talking about the cup of suffering. The cross that was just hours away. But then He said, you see, but not my will, your will be done. You've seen this quote, I have too, many times. And I've commented on it many times because I think it's unbiblical. The common saying is, faith is not believing God can, but God will. Quote that to Jesus. I think a better way of saying it, a more biblical way of saying it is this. Faith is believing God can if God wills. And that's what those three young men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that's what they were saying. I believe God can. We believe God can if God wills. In that case, He did will that. Other cases, no. So, what's our big thing to ponder? Let's read this together. Faith is best expressed in trusting God when we do not know the outcome. If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God we serve is able to save us from it, and He will rescue us from your hand, which He did. But even, I would say, even if they perished in the fire, they were rescued from the king's hand. Gone to heaven, which I'm sure would have been all right with them. They did not know for sure, is the point, that God was going to spare them from the fire. But they trusted God enough to know. Let Him decide. Something similar, Job says in his great suffering, though God slay me, yet will I trust in Him. Pretty powerful words right there. So, faith is best expressed in trusting God when you do not know what the outcome will be. These three young men in our story today are best known by their Babylonian names. But before they were hauled away to Babylon, they had their Hebrew names. Shadrach's real name is Hananiah, which means Yahweh shows grace. Meshach's real name was Mishael, which means who is like God? And Abednego's real name was Azariah. Yahweh helps. Even though they were carried away in a pagan land, their hearts, their minds, were still Hebrew, still so much part of the covenant of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. They were not going to forget who they were just because they were in a bad place. It's a good thing for us to remember. Are we not living in another country, temporary residents of a pagan land? Lessons for old and young alike, whether it's at work or at school. Our choices and priorities all come down to, do we have enough faith in the God who determines the outcomes and not in the outcomes themselves? Whoops, one more time. Ready? Faith is best expressed in trusting God when we do not know the outcome. And one more time. We are to ponder God's great works so our faith in God will grow bigger and our love for God will grow better. And now our benediction song, a prayer for God to be glorified in our church and in our lives. Let's stand and let's sing.